Very excited to be here today. It's kind of a tremendous moment in time from my standpoint in the supply chain area. We've survived COVID and all the trials and tribulations that came with that. And now I believe we're entering really a dawn of next generations of supply chain. We've invested an enormous amount of time thinking about what does the future look like, not from a supply chain lens, but the world around us. And the conclusions that we're quickly coming up to is the world is changing. We expect to see more change in the next 5 years in terms of political, socioeconomic, geographical, trade patterns, economic patterns than we've seen historically. And what that means is the old ways of doing things is just not going to work. We need to put ourselves in a position to be able to react faster, make better informed decisions. And the benefit of where we are in the world today is that we have technologies like '09 that have been ahead of the curve to create platforms that will allow us to begin to do that. So when we think about the next generation of planning, it's less about supply chain as a function, and it's more about how the supply chain is an enabler of the enterprise. Really the connective tissue from the commercial side of the business, all the way back through our suppliers and our suppliers. And inevitably, as that world changes at a faster rate than ever, how do we react? So I echo a lot of what Brett talked about with the latency of decision-making, breaking it down to minutes, and we're extremely excited about what's in front of us and the next challenge. The other thing is just the concept of autonomy. I think our perspective is a little bit different. We actually think that what Gen AI and AI is presenting is more a support system. So how are we better enabling our people in different ways? How do we think about these new technologies not as a replacement, but an augmentation of our people's skills? Nobody, growing up in supply chain, I started my career schlepping trucks around. That was not fun. So how do we take the non-value added work our people do and elevate them into roles where they move from just being people that are managing transactions to people that are orchestrating multiple components of a value chain and really helping solve bigger and broader decisions. So our journey with '09, and we'll bring up WestRock, has really been about that, about how do we envision the next generation? How do we set the supply chain up to be a value creation engine for the enterprise, right? And how do we elevate the skills and talents to shift from what historically was very physically orientated in importance to what we believe now is the data supply chain is becoming quickly more important than our assets in the world and how we coordinate that. So just to give a little context of how we're building up to that, is every year we do a digital supply chain study, just really to understand where people are investing, how things are going, and what trends are out there. This year, we're really, again, trying to pick up on how forward-thinking are our chief supply chain officers and our CIOs, or are they still in reaction mode and firefighting? Well, there's a couple key stats that we'll show here. So 62% of the CIOs surveyed indicate that their organizations are actively investing in cloud, which I don't think is a big surprise. Actually, maybe the surprise is it's a little bit lower. But we're still seeing a lot of investment in functional specific applications. So we're just starting to see a lot of the leading class companies start to go to platform, which again is really going to be the key to solve some of our bigger issues in the future. But what is really interesting is that those same executives, when talking about their programs, only 69% say they are not realizing their full value, right? And maybe some of you have experienced that. And we'll get into a little bit before we bring Mike up of some of the reasons why we see that. And as we're struggling to some extent to sort through those challenges, when we take the CEO's lens of the world, over 45% of the CEOs that we survey in our annual CEO study don't believe their business model is going to be viable in 10 years. So what that means for us is just further emphasizing how we start, that the pace of change and the scale of change in your enterprise is not just likely, it's probable. So being here and thinking about planning differently, that's going to be more dynamic and more configurable really is critically important. And then how we table the data and change roles and evolve people are going to be key. And I may go as far to say, if I could sit in front of the CEOs who, said they don't, the business model is, your business model definitely won't be viable if you are not building, in a strategic lens, a strong, committed, data-driven supply chain. Okay, let's advance. So, what's going on with the challenges? So we said this 83 market not getting investments. Some of the biggest reasons are all over the board. There's some patterns that change from year to year, but the themes are the same. The big theme is around data. Is the 73% say that data has been a challenge. Does anybody in this room experience data challenges during a system deployment? Okay. Data readiness is a key aspect of what we insist our clients do. Is that before we get too deep, that we understand and contextualize the data, not just from an IT lens of can we get it to integrate, but does our data even make sense from a business lens? So overcoming that challenge really involves intensity around data from the multiple points of view of the people that work with the data. 67% believe that all the digital work going on requires upskilling of their employees, but the juxtaposition of that is only 32% are really focused on investing in programs. One of the biggest failure points that we see is not bringing the user along for the journey. And I'll tell a story about one of your competitors, not in a good way. So I got a call from one of our account executives on a client. They said, hey, they put in this new system, it's not working. The system doesn't work. I'm like, okay, let me get on the phone with the client. And I'm like, what's going on? They're like, well, we put in this new systems and our inventory doubled. And I'm like, doesn't sound right. I'm like, how much change management did you do? What's change management? How much training did you do? What do you mean training? Yeah, we trained on the tool. I'm like, how long have your planners been in the existing system? Well, 30 years. So it's just a way to illustrate that along with the system change comes the bringing the employees along. Because foundationally, yes, they need to learn how to system, but many cases we see failure to actually teach them how to plan different. And you are seeing, for those who are already on 09, planning is changing. The way we do it is different. The gut feel goes away, and there will be immediate mistrust in the system unless they really understand the focus there. So the key themes to do that is of some of these changes are really, we're kind of compelling everybody to think bigger about your planning. Planning is just a piece of the enterprise. So when you start these journeys, ask your leadership, what does the business look like in 3 years, in 5 years? Is there something in my work that I need to be thinking about now that are going to help us accomplish that change in the future? So extend your vision. Don't underinvest in getting that organization ready, right? Find people. We love the rising star concept when we run these programs. They say, pick your brightest, and up and coming people, put them on this program and design a leadership role for them on the back end of it. So they're along and owning the journey. Have that clear strategy around data, right? Again, not just from can we get the data to flow from system A to system B, but does the data that we're flowing make sense? Where do we have data gaps? Where do we have latency? Where are all those components? How does the end user see and work with that data? And how do we want to do it in the future? And ultimately, find value. You're going in front of your executives asking for millions of dollars to invest in these systems, which is a good investment, but patience is thin now. So design your program in a way that, yes, you drive towards that long-term vision, but you find opportunities to win in the interim. Right? Find those places where I can maybe take a product category or SKU and drive a better forecast really quickly. Or maybe I can find places where I can lean out my inventory. In some cases, actually increase inventory to improve OTIF. Find those along the ways. That creates a ton of momentum and even solidifies the support that you get from those executives. So with this, I'm going to bring up Mike Brodsky. He's the supply chain transformation leader at WestRock. Big round of applause. So, you're ready to go. So I'm sure several people, particularly our CPG friends here, have heard of WestRock. For those that maybe know,
we have a few customers out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and Great to meet everyone here, and I'm sure we have a few customers in the room as well. So WestRock, if you don't know us, we're a very large paper and packaging company. We focus on differentiated solutions for our customers to make sure we serve their box needs, their sustainability needs, and ultimately be there when they need us. Because if you manufacture something, you probably need packaging. And so that's where we come into play. We've got 30 plus mills across North America and Latin America, over 300 converting facilities around the world. So a large footprint, a large way to serve our base.
Okay, so pretty complex supply chain?
Pretty complex. Those mills run 24/7. Shutting them down is a bad thing. Converting runs in a 24/5, 24/6, and so the lead times between them don't always match up. How do you get that heavy paper that you don't want to put on a plane? I'd hate to see that bill. You got to send it by truck and rail. So it's a lot of complexities to ultimately serve customers that say, hey, I need boxes tomorrow. The paper to make it will be here in 4 weeks. So how do you solve those problems?
Absolutely. So help the audience understand, how did you get to your '09 journey? What set the path up to arrive at where you're at today?
You know, you actually, in a way, you covered a lot of our burning platform as you were going through the early parts. But a few years ago, we started a journey where we were looking at WestRock as essentially in silos. We had 2 supply chains in the mills. We had decentralized across our converting facilities. And we brought on a chief supply chain officer, Peter Anderson, who was the first for our company, and said, to serve our customers, we have to do things differently. And not just our customers, but to serve our people too. They were in this do loop of these errors and going back through manual processes that we couldn't scale, and we needed to look at things differently. And so we went about our journey and said, how do we then take our 36 plus ERP systems with data all over the place, bring it together so that we can make decisions that impact our end customer? Because earlier on in mill planning, we didn't know what orders were coming in at our converting plants. I sent you paper and assumed it was the right one, and I hope it was what your customers were ordering. We needed to break those silos down. And that's really where it started. And then we partnered with you guys and started looking at the vision, and then where are we going to go? How do we actually drive to the end? And then we've made it time-bound as well. It can't be open-ended. We said in 2 years we want to get to these points. We need to bring teams along. And that's really where it started.
And then WestRock had a few other things going on that were pretty important. So why don't you talk about how this interplayed with those other major technology and operational improvement initiatives, and maybe some of the lessons learned of juggling and working in the context of a company that's going through massive change, not just in the supply chain, but in other areas.
Yeah, so we're also going through an ERP implementation and S4 journey like most. And so we're running those things in parallel. Oh, by the way, we're also picking up new procurement tools, logistics tools. We're doing a lot of things in a short period of time. And for planning, what we determined is we can't wait on ERP. That will take a long time. It's a long journey. It's got to take through different cycles. But what we can leverage, what we learned, is we needed to leverage data. We needed to leverage our structure for how we're building governance and how we're actually going to harmonize that information and then pull it into the tools. And thankfully, with '09, we were able to actually connect to a lot of our legacy systems. We're in our first major go live right now, actually, last month, and we're seeing that actually come through. So we're balancing it with the data teams. S4 is on a path. We're on a different one, because ultimately we're going to drive value faster. And then as the ERP comes along, we'll start to reconnect the pipes. But those short wins, and that's our timeline slide up here, it's short, quick wins. We didn't want to wait for perfect. Because if we waited for perfect, we would never get to the end. There's never a perfect time to start. There's never a perfect place to get into the implementation. You got to get people into the tools. You got to get people into the processes. And that's really the approach we took. We actually broke it down into different segments through our different business units to try to build teams and then go attack it.
Excellent. So when you thought about the timeline, what were some of the key drivers behind your unique timeline? And what were some of the areas maybe that you're looking at, you've already overcome, and that you're looking at in terms of places you see real opportunities to go after quick wins?
Sure. So we made some commitments in WestRock's Investor Day a couple of years ago. And so that was one driver of our timeline, to deliver value by the end of '25. And so our first time bound was, we're going to deliver a certain amount of value, which I think we'll talk about here in a minute. By the end of the '25, we want our timeline to fit. So let's not worry about it's going to take a lot of people. We know this. It's going to have a lot of complexity. Let's set up the boundaries. We then broke it down, as you mentioned, into different buckets with supply and demand. And we said, where can we get quick wins with inventory and our demand programs? Because one weakness that we had is we didn't actually have a demand planning team. We had commercial doing some work in the field. We had a small mill team that was collecting that data. And if we could start with getting demand up first and feeding it through our existing processes, it will allow me to build momentum to then bring supply along and the other fun things we get to do with inventory optimization, which is a huge thing for us that drove some of the journey. And a story I'll tell that kind of drove us through part of this journey, and I promise I'll be quick about it.
You're good.
So inventory, one of our burning platforms was we needed to reduce inventory coming out of COVID. There was a destocking going on. We had to find a way to get things out. And so Peter came to our group and said, we need to get this done. How do we bring it down? So, okay, we'll put a team together. We'll get data and take a look at where our positions are. And it's a little embarrassing to say, but it took us 4 weeks to get all the data together to actually say where all of our inventory was and how to attack it. And then we went and made progress, and we looked through standard processes and doing that work. And we made progress, and then about 8 months later, it started to tick back to where it was. And you said, well, why didn't you put in processes? Why didn't you do the standards? Well, we did, but the project team went elsewhere. There were other burning platforms. And so now we were able to bring these tools in to help us standardize those type of elements. Lowering inventory and putting it in the right place isn't a project. It's a way of life. You have to set up your tools to drive automation, and that's really where we're pushing for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the early results and the signals towards driving a big value is all there.
Yeah.
So like that's the fun stuff, but like maybe help out with a little lessons learned, maybe specifically around people. Your industry is generally not known as super progressive. I think the last time we built a paper mill in the US was over 50 years ago.
Yep.
You got a lot of old school people running operations. So tell us a little bit about how you're handling that change management aspect and bringing your teams along for the journey.
Yeah, you said something really, really critical early on in your presentation about what I consider is going beyond the tool. So we can implement a tool. We can put it up in place. We did that. We actually spent a lot of our time, specifically partnered with your team actually, in driving, okay, if I put demand in, where does it go? How do I integrate it into my finance teams? Because, oh, by the way, today I have to drive a financial forecast. And if I'm changing the input to that, they need to accept our numbers as well. And how do we do the change management with that group? With the commercial team, do I want them in the tool? Do I not want them in the tool? Do I want to start telling them they're not good at forecasting? Because that's also an issue that we have. And we spend a significant amount of time putting people in place specifically to work with all those different work areas, and then going out, doing lunch and learns, showing them the tool and the cool things they could use. By the way, I'm a supply chain person. I like to geek out on the data and the information, but that's not how we should talk to commercial. You got to talk to them about what's important to them, knowing your audience, driving to what they know best, and that's really helped us. So we're in this cycle right now, working with commercial. We actually finished our demand forecast a week early with the team and getting input. It's been going extremely well because they knew what to expect. There's little bumps along the road, but it's really that engagement that you have to think through that gets you to the end. You can't just implement a tool.
Yeah, and you feel it when you're on our side working with a client, and it's one of the first clients where your team exhausted our team in all the best possible ways. Questions, challenges, like they really have been living and breathing the program and trying to do it. So, I think another aspect of this is start your team from a position of curiosity, like have them feel like they own Absolutely. It in the way that you all structured it. Allowed them to really put their fingerprints on the design, get early, and be invested in it.
Yeah.
So really great story. Any other lessons learned with our last minute here that you'd like to share with the team?
Sure. It's continuing the theme of people. These transformations, especially as we believe it at WestRock, they're not part-time jobs. We did pull our best out. We drove them into positions, and we structured our teams to go attack these problems, knowing that some of the roles that they're going to go in, they won't exist in a year. They won't exist in 2. We're going to roll them back out, to your point, into new positions. And that really, really helped us. And then focus on data. I'm not worried about my friends at 09 configuring our tool. They did a great job doing that for us. But if the data wasn't right, we thought we were going to need 5 resources for data. I tell you right now, we're running with double. We needed to bring them in. How are we going to harmonize it? How are we going to transform it? Some of the data we're actually sending directly to the 09 platform. They're doing some of the work for us. And it's this balance that you can't underestimate. Because at the end of the day, when you send something off to that sales team or that finance team and they go, this doesn't look right, you're losing momentum. And so you got to spend time on it. And it's not just do the work. Don't forget about governance. If you don't have a way to maintain it and how you're going to do it in the field and customer service and those that touch the keys, you're going to have a lot of rework to do later.
Excellent. Thanks for your time, Mike, and thanks for spending time with us today. And thanks, 09, for the privilege of being able to sponsor this. Thanks.